If you told me a year ago that I'd end up inheriting everything my grandfather ever built, I'd have laughed you right out of the room. Because in my family, I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the prodigy. I wasn't even the black sheep. I was the invisible one. You know, the kid in every family photo, wedged between the better-looking siblings like a regrettable houseplant. That was me. My sister Madison was the family's crown jewel. At 5, she was modeling in local pageants. At 15, she was dating some varsity quarterback with rich parents. By 20, she was influencing skincare products from hotel bathrooms she never paid for. Me? I was the backup plan in case her life imploded. The one who kept quiet, did well enough to avoid attention, and never asked for much. I'd always assumed that's how Grandpa saw me, too. After all, he never made a fuss about me the way he did about Madison. When she graduated high school, he bought her a brand new Jeep. When I graduated college, he mailed me a card that said, "You did it." No money inside, just a grocery store receipt he must have used as a bookmark. So when Grandpa passed away, I figured I'd get nothing. I didn't even get an invitation to the will reading. I found out it was happening because Madison posted a smug little story on Instagram, captioned, "Family Legacy Day. Can't wait to honor the man who built it all." There she was, holding a cold brew, posing in front of the law office like she was about to sign a modeling contract. My parents stood behind her, beaming. Nobody called me. Nobody texted. Nobody even pretended to include me. I sat in my tiny apartment that morning, eating cereal over the sink, and realized they were all gathered to divide up the spoils of a life I'd been deliberately shut out of. And you know what? Something in me snapped. All those years of being ignored. All the times I was told, "You wouldn't understand, this is for family." As if I was some stray dog that wandered onto the porch. I decided right then that I was done letting them write me out of the story. If Grandpa hadn't left me anything, fine. I could live with that. But I'd be damned if I was going to let them pretend I didn't exist. So I threw on the cleanest clothes I had, black jeans, a button-up that only had one wrinkle, and drove downtown. The law office was in one of those buildings with polished brass plaques and a smell that screamed old money. The receptionist looked up when I stepped in, clearly trying to figure out if I was lost. "I'm here for the Carter estate reading," I said, voice steady. Her eyebrows climbed about an inch. "I'm sorry, are you on the list?" I smiled. The same polite, empty smile my family had given me for years. "I'm family," I said. "And you can tell them I won't leave until I hear what he left." Behind her, I could see the frosted glass door leading to the conference room. Blurry shapes moved around inside. Probably my parents, Madison, maybe a few second cousins who'd flown in hoping for a payday. The receptionist shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. I'll check with Mr. Dunham." She disappeared through the door, shutting it carefully behind her. For a moment, I stood there in the lobby, hands shoved in my pockets, trying to pretend my heart wasn't slamming against my ribs. 30 seconds later, the door opened again. And the looks on their faces? Worth every mile I'd driven. They all stared at me like I'd burst in waving a machete. My mother was the first to recover. She plastered on her best hostess smile, the one she used when neighbors dropped by unannounced. "Oh," she said, voice brittle. "You're here." "No, hi." "No, how are you?" Just a statement of fact, like she was commenting on the weather. My dad didn't even bother pretending. He just looked annoyed, like I'd ruined a surprise party by existing. And Madison, dear, perfect Madison, folded her arms and raised one eyebrow. "I thought you said he wasn't coming," she said to my mom, not even bothering to lower her voice. I ignored them and turned to Mr. Dunham, the lawyer. He was older, with the kind of posture that suggested he'd been dealing with entitled families for a long, long time. "Do you have a seat for me?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Mr. Carter, of course. Please come in." The way my parents shifted in their chairs told me everything I needed to know. They'd tried to keep me out. And Mr. Dunham hadn't let them. I sat down at the end of the long mahogany table. Nobody moved to make space, so I pulled up an extra chair from against the wall. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. Then Mr. Dunham cleared his throat and opened the thick folder in front of him. As I was saying before Mr. Carter arrived, he began, your grandfather left very clear instructions. He updated his will 18 months ago, witnessed by myself and 2 notaries. He made explicit choices regarding his estate. I glanced at Madison. She was already smirking, like she knew exactly what was coming. She probably thought Grandpa had left her the house, the investments, the old Ford pickup he'd loved more than any person. And maybe he had. But when Mr. Dunham started reading, I knew immediately something was different. To my granddaughter Madison, he said, voice steady, I leave the contents of my workshop. May you find something useful in learning to build rather than borrow. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Madison's smile faltered. The workshop? Grandpa's tools and half-finished projects? She'd probably never set foot in there. Mr. Dunham continued. To my daughter Diane and my son-in-law Richard, I leave my collection of first edition books and the family photographs. My mother looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. Nothing about the house. Nothing about the accounts. Nothing about the land. Then Mr. Dunham turned to me. And to my grandson, he said, voice softening, I leave the remainder of my estate in full. The house, the land, all remaining financial assets and holdings, and the 1969 Ford F-100. Because you showed up when it mattered. The silence was the kind that would have been funny if it hadn't been so heavy. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Madison blinked, like she couldn't process the words. My father made a strangled noise that might have been a protest, or a gasp. My mother's hand fluttered to her throat. This has to be some mistake, she said, her voice shrill. Mr. Dunham didn't flinch. No mistake. I have the signed documents here, and your father's instructions were quite specific. He wished to acknowledge Mr. Carter's loyalty and support. Madison's chair scraped loudly as she stood. This is ridiculous. He barely even visited Grandpa. I didn't say anything. Because we both knew she was lying. I'd been there every weekend, fixing the fence, bringing groceries, listening to Grandpa tell the same stories over and over. She'd been too busy documenting her self-care, retreats and sponsored skincare hauls. Mr. Dunham glanced at me, then back at the rest of them. I'm sorry if this is unexpected, but Mr. Carter's wishes are legally binding. My mother's eyes snapped to mine, her expression an unsettling mix of desperation and fury. Why didn't you say anything? She demanded. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Maybe because I wasn't invited. And for once, they had no clever reply. Nobody moved. For a few seconds, the only sound was the HVAC humming above us like it was as uncomfortable as the rest of the room. Madison was still standing, one manicured hand planted on her hip, like she was posing for a photo she hadn't realized would haunt her forever. My mother was blinking rapidly, trying to process the fact that the entire estate had just slipped through her fingers. My father finally cleared his throat. This isn't fair, he said, in the tone he usually reserved for store clerks who refused his expired coupons. Mr. Dunham adjusted his glasses. Fairness isn't the standard. Your father had testamentary capacity and made these choices with full awareness. Madison's voice went shrill. He was old. He didn't know what he was doing. I looked her dead in the eye. He knew exactly what he was doing. Because he did. Grandpa wasn't senile. He was deliberate. Meticulous. The same man who color-coded his workshop and hand-labeled every jar of screws had written this will. And he'd chosen me. Madison turned to my parents, searching for backup. You can't just let this stand. My mother finally spoke, her voice brittle. We'll contest it. Mr. Dunham looked unbothered. You're certainly entitled to file a contest, though I will remind you that both of you signed as witnesses to this will when it was finalized. Your signatures are on file, affirming that your father was of sound mind. It was like someone had lobbed a grenade into the conversation. Madison's mouth dropped open. Wait, what? I tried not to smile. My father looked at my mother like she'd betrayed him. You didn't tell me you signed. I thought. She sputtered, glancing at me, then back at Mr. Dunham. I thought it was just an update. He said it wouldn't change much. Madison made a strangled noise. So you signed off on this? You knew he was leaving it to him? I didn't know, my mother snapped. He said it was routine. I stayed quiet. It was better to let them fight themselves. Mr. Dunham cleared his throat gently. Regardless, your signatures make any claim of diminished capacity substantially harder to prove. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered every Thanksgiving I spent sitting at the kid table while Madison held court with her fake friends. Every birthday they forgot to call. Every time my parents said, Madison has more important things to focus on. When I asked if she'd be visiting Grandpa, and the guilt vanished. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. This isn't over, he hissed at Mr. Dunham. Of course not, the lawyer said calmly, folding his hands over the file. But in the meantime, the house and all assets belong to Mr. Carter. He turned to me. Do you have any questions? I swallowed. Just, what happens next? Next, he said, we'll file the necessary paperwork to transfer ownership. You'll also receive access to Mr. Carter's accounts and personal effects. My mother's face had gone pale. His accounts? Yes, Mr. Dunham said, glancing at her briefly before returning his gaze to me. Your grandfather left a substantial portfolio. He specified that all liquid assets were to go to you, minus a small trust for Madison's educational expenses. Madison's head jerked up. Educational expenses? I'm 26. Mr. Dunham didn't blink. The language was quite clear, in case she ever decides to finish what she starts. For a second, I thought she might actually scream. Instead, she spun on her heel and stalked out, her heels clacking across the tile like a punctuation mark. My parents followed her, my father muttering something about ungrateful little bastard. I didn't flinch. Because for once, I wasn't the one being dismissed. I was the one holding the keys. The room felt oddly quiet after they left. Mr. Dunham shut the folder with a decisive thud and set it gently in front of me, as though I might run if he moved too fast. Mr. Carter, he said, I realize this is a lot. That was an understatement. 3 hours ago, I was eating generic cornflakes over the sink, convinced I'd get nothing. Now I own everything my grandfather ever built. And everyone who'd spent years ignoring me had to watch me collect the pieces. I picked up the folder and flipped it open, hands slightly unsteady. Inside were copies of the will, asset statements, and a list of instructions Grandpa had left. One of them was handwritten. I pulled it free. It was just a short note on plain lined paper, folded in half. If they didn't invite you, it's because they knew what was coming. Don't let them shame you for accepting what you've earned. Grandpa. I blinked hard, trying to clear the sting behind my eyes. Mr. Dunham waited patiently. After a moment, I tucked the note back into the folder and looked up. What do I have to do? We'll start by transferring the deed, he said calmly. I'll have the forms prepared today. You'll also need to sign documents to assume control of the investment accounts. I recommend retaining a financial advisor to help you navigate the portfolio. Your grandfather had substantial holdings, mostly conservative, but some high-yield investments. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. Deeds. Portfolios. Trusts. It didn't feel real. I'd spent my entire life being the backup plan, the kid everyone assumed would stay small so they could feel big. Now I was the one they had to call. Mr. Dunham hesitated. I should also advise you, your family may attempt to contest the will. You should be prepared. I nodded slowly. I am. Because deep down, I'd always known. If I ever got anything, they'd try to take it. But this time, they couldn't. I stood and shook Mr. Dunham's hand. He didn't smile, but his expression softened. Your grandfather was proud of you, he said. He spoke of you often. I didn't trust myself to answer. I left the office with the folder tucked under my arm, stepped into the bright sunlight, and took a deep breath. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could actually stand tall. When I got home, my phone was already buzzing. 3 missed calls from my mother. 2 from my father. A text from Madison. Enjoy it while you can. This won't stand. I ignored all of them. Instead, I called my boss at the warehouse where I'd been working 40-hour weeks to barely stay afloat. Hey, Jason, I said when he picked up. I won't be coming in on Monday. A beat of silence. You okay, man? Yeah, I said, voice steady. Actually, for once, I think I am. I hung up before he could ask anything else. Then I sat down on my sagging couch, set the folder on the coffee table, and just stared at it. There it was. Proof that I mattered to someone. Proof that showing up when nobody noticed had meant something. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to be the person who inherited an entire life's work. But I knew this. I wasn't going to let them bully me out of it. Not this time. I didn't plan to go to the house that night. But around midnight, when I still couldn't sleep, I grabbed the keys from the folder and drove. It was almost an hour out of the city. The roads were empty and dark, just the way Grandpa liked them. He used to say, "Nothing good happens on a crowded highway." When I pulled up, the porch light was on. He always left it on, even when he knew he wouldn't be back. The first thing I noticed when I stepped onto the porch was the smell: old wood, clean air, and the faintest trace of the motor oil he'd kept in the garage. I unlocked the door. The key turned without resistance. And just like that, I was inside. The living room hadn't changed. Same threadbare armchairs. Same faded blue couch with the blanket he never let anyone wash. The mantel was lined with photos, most of them of Madison. But tucked behind one of her graduation portraits was a smaller frame I'd never seen. It was a picture of me, 10 years old, holding up a crooked birdhouse I'd built. Grandpa had one hand on my shoulder, grinning like I'd just invented fire. I picked it up, throat tight. All those years I thought he didn't notice me. Maybe I was wrong. I set the photo back carefully. Then I walked the rooms one by one. The kitchen still had the jar of peppermints he kept for guests. The back hallway smelled like sawdust. When I stepped into the study, I almost turned around and left. The desk was piled with papers, bank statements, letters, scribbled notes. But what stopped me was the envelope propped neatly in the center. My name on the front. I opened it with hands that wouldn't quite steady. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you're here, it means they tried to shut you out. But you showed up anyway. You always did. This house is yours now. Do something good with it. P.S. The old truck still runs. Needs a new battery. Left the manual in the glove box. I laughed, half sob, half relief, and sank into the desk chair. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Nobody knew I was here. Nobody could tell me to leave. It was the first time in my life the silence felt like peace instead of punishment. The next morning, I woke up on the couch to sunlight spilling across the floorboards. My phone had 17 missed calls. Voicemails, too. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I made coffee in the old percolator Grandpa swore made it the right way. And when the caffeine finally settled my thoughts, I called Mr. Dunham. "I'm here," I told him. "I see," he said mildly. "They've been in touch." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. "I won't be leaving," I said. "Understood." He paused. "There's something else," he added. "Your grandfather placed a safety deposit box in your name. I can meet you at the bank to retrieve it." My heart gave a funny little skip. "What's in it?" he sighed. He didn't say. "Just that you know what to do." Of course he didn't. That was Grandpa. I set the phone down and looked around the living room. The house wasn't a prize. It wasn't leverage. It was a declaration. I'd been here all along. And now, they'd have to come to me if they wanted anything at all. The drive to the bank felt surreal. A week ago, I was debating whether I could afford new tires. Now, I was walking into a private banking office with a lawyer at my side. Mr. Dunham met me in the lobby. He looked exactly the same as he had in the conference room, unflappable, mildly bored, and dressed like he'd billed by the minute. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. We were led into a small room lined with safety deposit boxes. A bank manager in a navy suit unlocked box 211 and slid it toward me. It felt heavier than I expected. Inside, I found two things. First, a thick, sealed envelope with my name on it. Second, a small black velvet pouch. Mr. Dunham raised an eyebrow. Shall I step out? I shook my head. I pulled out the envelope first. Inside was a stack of documents, property titles, account information, a letter detailing Grandpa's remaining assets in painstaking detail. No surprises. I was about to close it when I noticed a scrap of yellow paper tucked between two account statements. It was another note in Grandpa's handwriting. If they come knocking, remember, you don't owe them what they wouldn't have given you. Let them carry their own regrets. I swallowed hard. Then I opened the pouch. Out slid an old silver pocket watch. I knew it instantly. Grandpa's watch. The one he'd worn every day of his life. I'd never seen him without it. It was engraved on the back. Time is what you do with it. I closed my hand around it, feeling something settle in my chest. When I looked up, Mr. Dunham was watching me with a thoughtful expression. He wanted you to have that, he said quietly. Yeah, I said, voice rough. I know. By the time I got back to the house, I'd missed another dozen calls. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I carried the watch upstairs and set it on the desk. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I knew before I even looked who it would be. My mother. She stood on the porch in a pale pink cardigan, the kind she wore when she wanted to look harmless. Her smile was brittle. Sweetheart. Can we talk? I didn't open the screen door. About what? About all this, she said, gesturing vaguely at the house like it was some mistake she planned to fix with a firm voice and a hug. I didn't reply. She tried again. Your sister is very upset. We all are. This isn't what your grandfather would have wanted. I raised an eyebrow. He put it in writing. Her mouth tightened. He was old. Confused. You know that. I thought of the note in the deposit box. Let them carry their own regrets. Mom, I said evenly, you left me out of the will reading. You didn't even tell me he'd passed until I saw it online. Her eyes flickered. It was a difficult time. Not too difficult for you to invite Madison. She swallowed, looking away. Your sister has always been more reliable. I felt something in me go still. There it was. The real truth. I wasn't the reliable one. I was the afterthought. Until now. She sighed, pressing a hand to her chest. Landon, please. We can work something out. Maybe a distribution. Fairness for everyone. You want me to split it? I asked. Of course, she said quickly, relief flooding her expression. You know your sister has her startup. She could really use. I held up a hand. No. Her mouth opened, then closed. No? That's right, I said. No. Her jaw clenched. You're being unreasonable. No, I said calmly. I'm just finally being honest. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't over. I smiled, the same polite, empty smile she'd given me my whole life. I know. And I shut the door. For 2 days, my phone became an instrument of psychological warfare. Voicemails from my father, his voice cycling through icy detachment, simmering resentment, and forced diplomacy. Texts from Madison that read like she'd swallowed a thesaurus of manipulation. This is tearing the family apart. Don't you care how this makes us look? Grandpa would never want this fighting. When that didn't get a reply, she switched to insults. You're just being petty. You don't deserve any of this. I didn't answer. Because that's what they wanted, for me to be the one who cracked first. The morning it all came to a head, I woke up before dawn, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to happen. I sat at the kitchen table with Grandpa's watch in my palm, tracing the engraved words over and over. Time is what you do with it. By mid-morning, I heard tires on the gravel drive. I looked out the window and saw the black SUV, my father's, pulling up like it was reclaiming territory. I knew Madison was inside before the door even opened. Sure enough, she stepped out first, dressed like she was on her way to a corporate mediation, a pressed navy blazer, hair twisted back in an immaculate bun. My father followed, his face set in that expression I knew too well, impatience tinged with disdain. I waited for them to ring the bell, but they didn't. Instead, my father walked right up the porch steps and knocked once, sharp and authoritative, as if he still expected me to answer like a scolded child. I opened the door just enough to look at them. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Landon," he said evenly, "we need to talk." "About what?" I asked, leaning my shoulder against the doorframe. "This nonsense," he said, gesturing at the house, as if it were an embarrassing purchase I'd made on impulse. "You know this can't stand." Madison shifted her weight, clutching her phone like she was about to record the encounter in case she needed a soundbite for sympathy later. "You don't even know what you're doing," she chimed in, her voice pitched high. "Do you realize the upkeep costs alone? You'll drown in taxes." "I'll figure it out," I said. "You think this is some victory?" my father snapped. "But it's not. It's a liability. And you're going to ruin everything your grandfather built." I studied him for a moment, taking in the lines around his mouth, the stiffness in his shoulders. "Funny," I said quietly. "I thought he built this for himself. And he left it to me." Madison stepped closer, trying to soften her voice. "You're not being reasonable. You're being emotional." My laugh was short and cold. "And you're being opportunistic." Her mouth opened, then closed again. My father glanced around the porch, as if he was assessing it for resale already. "This property was always meant to stay in the family," he said. "I am family," I said. He ignored that. "We're prepared to make you a fair offer. You can take it, walk away with more than you've ever had, and start fresh." "Start fresh?" I echoed. "From what, exactly?" He hesitated. "From the resentment you're carrying." I felt something in my chest harden. "You mean the resentment I earned every time you pretended I wasn't here?" Madison swallowed. "Look, can we just stop fighting? We're all tired. We've all been through enough. This house, it belongs to all of us." "No," I said. "It doesn't." For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then my father nodded at Madison. She rummaged in her bag and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, too thick to be anything casual. He took it from her and held it out, like an olive branch dipped in poison. "This is an offer," he said quietly. 7 figures. Clean title transfer. You sign, and we never have to speak about this again." I didn't take it. "You think this is about money?" I asked, my voice flat. "Isn't it?" Madison shot back, her face pinched. "No," I said. "It's about finally being seen." My father's mouth thinned to a hard line. "You're making a mistake." I raised my eyebrows. "I thought mistakes were your specialty." He inhaled sharply. Madison's face flushed pink. "You've always been selfish," she spat. "You think you're the only one who loved him? You think you're the only one who deserves anything?" "No," I said. "But I'm the only one who showed up." Her mouth opened again, but nothing came out. I took the envelope from my father, turned it over in my hand, and then set it carefully on the porch railing. "You can take this back," I said. "I'm not selling." My father's jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. "You'll regret this," he said. His voice was soft, almost pitying. "One day you'll wish you'd listened." I looked past them at the field beyond the driveway, the line of trees Grandpa had planted 50 years ago. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I will." And I closed the door. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the knob, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. It was the first time I'd ever told them no. And it felt like finally breathing after years underwater. When their car finally backed down the driveway, I watched from the front window. Madison was gesturing wildly in the passenger seat, probably complaining that I'd embarrassed them. My father didn't even look back. Good. I didn't need them to look anymore. That afternoon, I sat on the porch steps with Grandpa's watch in my hand, listening to the cicadas humming in the trees. The place felt different already. Lighter somehow. It struck me that this was what he'd wanted all along, not just for me to inherit his house or his land, but for me to inherit the freedom he'd spent his life earning. And maybe, finally, to stop apologizing for taking up space. My phone buzzed on the railing. A new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first. When I played it, my chest went tight. It was Aunt Karen, Grandpa's sister. "Landon," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "I heard what happened. Your grandfather, he was proud of you. I hope you know that." There was a long pause. "And I'm proud of you too. You deserve this. All of it. Call me if you want to talk." I swallowed hard and saved the message. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed someone, anyone, to say it out loud. That evening, I opened every window in the house. Let the late summer breeze roll through the rooms. I made dinner in Grandpa's kitchen for the first time, something simple: pasta, garlic bread, and a cheap bottle of red wine. No fancy table settings. No polite conversation. Just me, the quiet, and the comforting smell of old wood and fresh air. When the food was ready, I sat at the kitchen table, the one where Grandpa used to sit with his ledger, and poured a glass of wine. I raised it in the air, like he was across from me. "To showing up," I murmured. "Even when no one else does." After dinner, I walked the property line. The grass was high along the fence, but the sunset caught every blade and turned it gold. Standing there, I thought about all the times I'd waited for them to love me the way they loved Madison. The years I spent trying to be easier, quieter, more convenient. And how none of it had ever been enough. But this house, this land, this legacy, was proof that sometimes, just being yourself is all you need to do. When I came back inside, I found the envelope they'd left on the porch. 7 figures they'd offered. Like money was a cure for everything they'd never given. I slid it into the wood stove, struck a match, and watched it burn. The flames flickered bright and hot, curling the paper to ash. When it was gone, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Just relief. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the living room floor. I made coffee and sat on the porch steps, the watch warm in my palm. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide I mattered. I'd decided it for myself. I didn't know what came next. But I knew this. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't apologizing. And I wasn't for sale.